And so that brings me to back to our protagonist. My question for you guys: there was a gender swap in this entire thing. Now, I want to talk about this gender swap because I think it's important. I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I like to think that Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to do this for these reasons. He may not have, but in the world that we live in currently, where you have all of these people who tend to get a little bit out of shape over swapping of genders, swapping of races, all of that kind of thing, I think sometimes the swapping of a gender is very, very important because it sends a very specific message. The fact that they turned the protagonists of this story into women completely changed the themes and the messages behind this entire story. At least to me, at least that's what I thought. But before I go in on all of the little things that I thought about it, I really want to get you guys' thoughts on the gender swap, on the importance that it has on the theme. And do you think it was a good decision to swap it, or do you think it should have been men? And it's okay if you did think it should have been men. It's not a problematic statement to say that. I want to put that out there.
I think for what I can imagine, the goal being the power of this story was proven when, I mean, obviously when the book came out, because it was made into a movie. But it was definitely proven when the movie came out in 1979, because it became such a cult classic. And as we were saying earlier, it was one of the first times that they had presented a group of people. They had told a story about a group of people that had traditionally only been represented and posed as a social problem. Mm-hmm. And they said, let us tell a story from these people's perspective about what life is like for them. And they can tell you how they want their lives to be better, instead of you imposing how you want to fix the problem of their existence. So the power of story being representation and giving these people a voice, regardless of, if they were uneducated, if they were, poor, if they were living as gang members, you were still giving them a voice to tell a story from their perspective, and it let people relate to them and understand them better. And I think that the power of that story, you can trace the power of story through all of time, but there's certain ones that like you see repeated, and it's always so cool to see such a stark reminder that the power of story never changes regardless of the time period. So you can take a story that did this amazing thing in 1979, you now tell it again in 2024, you have a different generation, but a story that still has the same power of representation, just for a new audience. So I think that to that end, the purpose of this story was achieved very well by the gender swaps. And there were several. There wasn't just one. There were several instances where there was a gender swap. And sometimes, at first, it made me curious, because when we get introduced to the gang, the Busies, at first, my first time listening through it, I had to really read the lyrics to pick up where, like, what was actually happening, because it's a lot going on. But the Busies, originally I had written down in my notes, like, why were they a thing? Like, were they actually necessary to the story arc? But then I realized, like, with the gender swaps, the entire story kind of became a metaphor of everything that women go up against, and different challenges that they can face depending on the experience. And in that sense, like, the Busies made sense, and their run-in with them made sense. So I think that it gave a new power, the same power, but new meaning to the story. And the meaning was very well executed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, like, I have 3 points on this. 2 are not interesting. The third one is. So the thing is, like, I went to plays, but I didn't go to plays until I was in high school and I became a theater kid. Something I always loved about theater, always, is the fact that you can be any skin color and people will just accept it. So I'm Latino, right? And I was in stuff like Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap, right? Which doesn't make a lick of gosh dang sense. If you want to look at the story, he becomes this brown, black-haired guy, a brown-skinned, black-haired guy. Makes no sense, right? But people just accept it. It's just a thing in theater, and that's something I always really, really liked, even as a little kid in theater. That everyone you just bought it. You're like, okay, that's the character, doesn't matter. So for me, gender swap, this, that, it doesn't really. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. Because then we get to listen to Philippa Sue, which, by the way, Philippa Sue is amazing, and like a side tangent here, by the way, on that Paramount Plus thing, right? Because I grew up with Steve from Blue's Clues, right? Because he's like
yes.
I worship the ground he walks on, right? And there was the Blues Clues movie, right? It's like with all three of the hosts, and I was like, oh, okay, that'd be kind of cool, whatever, right? It wasn't very good, by the way. Steve was amazing, but it wasn't very good in my opinion. But there's this whole subplot, by the way, of this rainbow puppy, which is as visually adorable as you think. She's running with BD Wong, of all people, by the way, as her manager. That's weird, or director. That's weird. Anyway, but they're going through auditions for the little cameos, and Philippa Sue pops up, and I'm like, this is amazing. And this dog says, no, you're not the right talent. And I was like, so. By the way, so the fact that, which actually leads to my second point of the reason why I think the gender swap is really cool, is because, remember, in a male-dominated society, basically every single freaking character is a guy. Every single person's a guy. Guys come first. Guys this. Blah 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 blah. And guess what? It gets boring. Like there's a really interesting. I wish I could find it. I probably could find it. There was an article from 1977. From an author whose name escapes me. I apologize, but he was black and he was gay and he was a sci-fi writer, which is like 3 things you don't want to be in the 70s, but he was like loud and proud to my understanding. And he wrote a review of the original Star Wars movie when it came out, and he loved it, and he said it was amazing, it was great. But he's like, why do all the rebels look like Midwestern college footballers? And it's an interesting concept, right? And you get into production history again, blah, 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 blah. And it's not a problem, but it is an interesting point that it's like, that's usually what you're dealing with. A lot of guys. There's a lot of guys because of marketing reasons and socioeconomic and blah, 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 blah. So the moment you just make the cast women, it becomes way different, way more interesting. And you get different talent, i.e. Philippa Sue gets to be in the part. So that's always kind of been my stance on that. But the third interesting thing, though, right, is so the whole plot of this movie, which, by the way, and I'll get to that in a second, it's incredible, but we'll get to that in a second. What's interesting is the plot is the gang has to run,
Mm-hmm.
fight, run, get down to Coney Island, get back home, right? That's really fantastic as a concept, right, as a premise. So I'll say this point here. I was listening to this. I'm like, dang, this is basically like a Daredevil comic. So by the way, everyone, I'm a huge Daredevil fan. I have like a big collection of Daredevil comics like all my life. So that's a very, very personal character for me. But I was listening, so I'm like, this one makes such a great Daredevil story of trying to just run through this labyrinth of New York at night, by the way, which again, atmospheric tone, and bumping into these guys. And apparently I read somewhere like the movie was very inspired by comic books, which, by the way, friendly reminder, everyone, try different parts of your ingredient list, because you could toss in comic books and toss in soap operas and blah, 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 and see what you get. You'll find some interesting stuff. But that's all really fantastic. But when you make the gang women, there is a whole different level of predatoriness. Like, so you have quiet girls, right? Quiet girls don't make it home. I don't need to say more than that. And it's an interesting point because also it makes you consider, like you said, Jalen, this whole point in a different way. Because when you're chasing a bunch of guys, they're just a bunch of guys. They're a bunch of dudes trying to make it home. But when they're a bunch of gal dudes, then suddenly there's this underlying predatorial concept, which is why I think the song is Sick of Running, right? becomes a completely different song. It becomes a completely different, and it's a different kind of minority context of, again, the gangs, their problem children in the 70s, their step one. Now 2024, step two, we can expand the concept of minority conversations of who wants to fight and who's sick of running. And so as they go run and run and run in this, okay, I'll just say now, this Genndy Tartakovsky. Anyone who's a fan of Samurai Jack, I love Samurai Jack. Genndy Tartakovsky is one of my favorite filmmakers. And that's a lot what the story is, of the simplicity, the genius simplicity of going from A to B. Good luck, kids. Get from A to B. You have fun. Sometimes, honestly, audience, that's all you need. You just need something that simple, and you can delve into it. And some of the delve into is they're running and running and running and barely making it. And then they just go, screw this, man. I'll kick your arse. I can't take this anymore. And all of that becomes something so different when you make the main cast ladies, which is fascinating to do, because like you said, it creates a whole different kind of conversation that makes you think differently. So I thought the gender swap was both aesthetically cool, and just for the sake of fun, like, because I don't care, but there is a deeper theme to it, because the story of ladies running through the night trying to survive brutal gangs and finally saying, screw it, I'm gonna kick some dudes in the balls is fantastic. So yeah.
I have two off-topic things. One of them being going back to introduction. The plot was plainly said in the very beginning: survive the night. That was the plot. And again, like you said, Charles, it can be that simple, and it was so fascinating. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. And another thing, can we just all recognize that New York City, it really is the real life urban fantasy dystopian world that like mean I see it used in so many different art pieces, because it does have such strong atmosphere and such strong history and culture. It really is like a real life urban fantasy and land.
and to that end, by the way, I'd like to throw out there that there is a lot of adventure and struggle in the story, because most of it is they go from train to train and walk, because like it's just a city, right? Alleyways, buildings. What more can you do? And once you've seen your bazillionth superhero movie, you're like, it's just New York, guys. I don't care. But this story, like you said, it creates its whole other world. But you can also relate to it, because technically we could all do the same thing. So yeah, a very good point about like the ordinary can become quite extraordinary when you get a different perspective to the whole thing, which I think is a recurring element of this piece.
And also going back, sorry, I was adding another random thing, going back to the gender changes, but also kind of expanding it a little. It kind of hit me. One of the parts that I really like laughed at and cheered hard for was the sick of running, like in the park. Ajax said, I'm sick of it. I'm gonna go pick a fight with this dude that's making advances at us. Because yeah, screw it. And the line where, he asks, you got a boyfriend? And she says, nah, I was the problem child. And then like 2 lines later, she's kicking his butt. And regardless of the fact that he turned out to be a cop who then arrested her.
She made me very angry, by the way. I hear the chains on the album and was like,
we were getting ass kicking.
So, yeah.
But the whole idea of the problem children, or those who were called problem childs, being the embodiment of God's justice in our world to people who are just dicks.
Like I said, Daredevil.
Yeah. Exactly. That part made me laugh, and I really appreciated it. So
I think for me, the gender swap I liked it. At first, my first thought was, oh, this is a necessary girl power story. But then the more and more I thought about it, I heard Quiet Girls, and I started to think, okay, it's more than just that. On top of that, the realization that before I jump into that, I want to say that I agree with you guys on the journey structure, because I think the journey structures are fantastic for keeping your story simple. We are executing a journey structure in the film that me and Charles are working on. It's the way to it's a great way to keep. Oh yeah.
I tease. Sorry, that's a Gravity Falls reference. Everyone, sorry, I couldn't resist.
It's a great way to maintain it. You've seen them in movies like Lord of the Rings, Wizard of Oz, Terminator 1. There are tons of movies where it's really just about
Terminator 2 as well.
Yes, Terminator 2 as well. But they are all journey movies, or road trip movies, if you will, in one specific setting, which I think is always cool. But back to the original part about gender swapping, I think that the movie